Always his favorite dinner partner.
Are you familiar with the parable of the organ grinder's monkey?
Mank is the new David Fincher film that is now on Netflix, and it's his first film since Gone Girl, which was like 6 years ago. Mank is the story of Herman Mankiewicz and how he developed the script for Citizen Kane, which is one of the most iconic films ever made. David Fincher is one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. The Social Network is one of my favorite movies ever made, and he's also made a bunch of classics. Fight Club, Seven, Zodiac, Gone Girl. He's made some really fucking good movies. So when I heard when David Fincher was making a movie about how Citizen Kane was made, it's gonna be a biopic, last biopic he made was fucking The Social Network. Of course I'm gonna be so excited for this movie. I was pumped for this movie. I first want to say that Mank is extremely well made. The direction of this movie is great. I love the style. It's very throwback. It's like a love letter to throwback Hollywood, that era, the 1930s and 1940s. The whole movie's in black and white. There's like color spots in the corners. The audio sounds very throwback. I loved everything about that in this movie. I think going with that approach with this movie, that style of direction, really added on to the experience. This movie feels like it was made in the 1930s and the 1940s. It works for the script. And let's talk about that script. This script is so sharp. It is so good. It's so sharp that it's one of those scripts that if you're not paying attention for literally 3 seconds, you might be lost for the rest of the scene. Jack Fincher wrote the script for this movie, and he is the father of David Fincher, who passed away in 2003. So I'm assuming this is sort of a passion project for David Fincher, and you could tell by the direction how he made this movie. It seems like each frame was filled with such care and such passion. But this script is great. You could tell that Jack Fincher put in a lot of work and a lot of care in the script. He must love Citizen Kane. He must love that era of Hollywood, because it really feels like a love letter to all of that. I would be shocked if this doesn't get nominated for an Oscar for screenplay, but I don't fucking know with Netflix and streaming now. I don't know how the rules work. It's stupid. Fuck the Oscars anyway. Speaking of Oscars, I think Gary Oldman's gonna get nominated for this because he did a great job. I didn't know much about Herman Mankiewicz, but he must be a witty ass motherfucker because Gary Oldman in this movie is so witty. He delivers this really intelligent dialogue with such wit, and it makes the scenes very funny. There are some very funny scenes in this movie, and it keeps the conversations pretty interesting. And that has to do with Gary Oldman's delivery. Amanda Seyfried is in this movie too, and she does a really great job. And she has great chemistry with Gary Oldman too. When those two are together on screen, it's really great stuff. And I think Lily Collins does a good job as well. She has great chemistry with Gary Oldman too. Everyone in this movie does a great job acting. Like I said before, I think David Fincher did a great job of the style of this movie, how it feels very throwback, very 1930s, 1940s. But you could tell that he was really inspired by Citizen Kane. There are a lot of visual callbacks, things like that throughout this movie that really make it work. And I will say, if you haven't seen Citizen Kane, I would recommend watching Citizen Kane before you watch this movie. It will make you appreciate Mank a little bit more. I've seen Citizen Kane, but I haven't seen it in a while. So there are things I recognize, some callbacks I recognize, but looking back on it, I kind of wish I watched Citizen Kane for a little refresh before I watch this movie. I'm just saying, watch Citizen Kane before you watch Mank. I just raved about this movie, but there are some disappointing parts about this movie. I think there are parts that drag. There are aspects in this movie that just aren't as interesting as other aspects. And because of that, the movie feels longer than its runtime. This movie's about 2 hours long. It felt like it was 2.5 hours long. The script does a good job of bouncing back and forth with timelines, because overall this story, unfortunately, isn't really that interesting. There are very interesting aspects in the story, but there are also some very boring aspects of this story. There are parts where I was bored in this movie. Like I said before, it has nothing to do with the script. The script is great. It does a great job of making mostly everything interesting. But overall, the story, since it's based on a true story, there's things you can't change, and there are just parts that just weren't that interesting. And because of that, there are parts of this movie that dragged. Which overall, for me, made Mank somewhat disappointing for me because I had such high expectations, and I'm not saying the movie's bad by any means. I think this movie's really well made, and everyone does a great job. But I guess I was expecting near perfection with this movie, and like I said before, it has nothing to do with anyone making this movie, the performances, writers, producers, anything like that. I just think there are parts that are just boring that you can't write around because it's a true story. And that's going to make your movie somewhat less interesting. But it doesn't ruin the movie as a whole. In the end, though, I really did enjoy Mank. I know it sounds like I was just shitting on it, but I think it's a really well-made movie. David Fincher does a great job directing this movie. His style is fantastic. It's a love letter back to that era of Hollywood, and it looks really great. Performances are great, but the best part about this movie is the script. It's razor sharp. There are some really great scenes, some really great dialogue. But my only issue with this film is sometimes the story can be uninteresting. And that's nothing to do with the filmmakers, that's just the story, something they can't write around. But it doesn't ruin the movie as a whole. I'm going to give Mank 7.5 Davy Daves. I was hoping for a higher rating for this movie because it is David Fincher, but there are things I love, and there's just some things I just didn't really like that much. I probably won't watch this movie ever again. That's not an insult to the movie. There's a lot of movies I absolutely adore that I probably just won't watch again. This is one of them. And I swear, that's not an insult. I know it sounds like one, but it really isn't. So Mank, it's on Netflix now. Let me know what you guys think of it when you see it. Thank you so much for watching. Click here to see more of Dave's Takes.